Welcome to class, everyone. Hello. When is the exam? Oh, the exam's today. I hope you studied. The exam is today, friend. If you didn't study, good luck. Today's lecture is one that was requested a lot. I asked on Twitter what lecture they would like to see. People wanted me to explain this. Welcome to PSCT, or problem-solving card text, and missing the timing. Those two things kind of go hand in hand. A lot of you guys know what missing the timing is. If you don't know, you're going to learn today. And if you do know what missing the timing is, you're going to understand when and why cards miss timing. But first, the most important thing is PSCT. PSCT is going to be the big chunk of today's lecture because there's a lot about PSCT that a lot of people don't know about. It's really interesting because a lot of people just assume PSCT is only conjunctions, which in fairness, a lot of conjunctions are a lot of what PSCT includes. However, there is more to it than just that. And then missing the timing is kind of a result of PSCT. What does PSCT stand for? We will get to that in just a moment. But it stands for problem-solving card text. But first, ladies and gentlemen, who am I? Of course, I am your teacher, Professor Distant Coder. You can call me Professor Coder. I've won locals a couple of times, meaning that I'm better than the average Yu-Gi-Oh player. So I'm very certified to be teaching you this. I was kicked out of the Konami Judge program, sad face. That actually did happen. That is not a joke. I was a Konami Judge. I no longer am. That's fine. It is what it is. It's okay. I passed the DB Judge exam with 96%. That's the more recent one. I've passed a couple with 98. I don't think I've passed a single one with under 94. I'm addicted to getting tattoos. As you can see, I have a lot of them. I like tattoos a lot. Tattoos are great. And my favorite Pokemon is Apom. As much as you would believe that it's Lucario based on the tattoo on my arm. But no, my favorite Pokemon is Ipom. Okay, sleeping in class. Scorcher! Hey! Wake up! Wake up, Scorcher! So let's begin with Chapter 1. PSCT. We're going to address the elephant in the room. What is PSCT? So this is a term that you've probably heard a lot. PSCT is something that's important and all Yu-Gi-Oh players should/need to understand in order to be able to play the game. So PSCT stands for problem-solving card text. And problem-solving card text is basically the way that Yu-Gi-Oh cards have been universally changed to all have the same kind of text. Every card that you'll see coming out will be written in a standardized way. That is problem-solving card text. Basically, it lets you know when you're reading a card how a card functions and why it functions the way that it does. So a good example of this is Monster Reborn. If you look at LOB Monster Reborn, pre-problem-solving card text, Monster Reborn said, select one monster card from either your opponent's or your own graveyard and place it on the field under your control in attack or defense position, face up. This is considered a special summon. That is very wordy for what Monster Reborn actually does, which if you look at the post-PSCT, the now current text of Monster Reborn, it now says, target one monster in either grave, semicolon, which is important, special summon it. Simple, right? So PSCT serves the purpose of not only simplifying card text as much as it can, but also making it so that every card is written the same way. So once you know how to read a Yu-Gi-Oh card, you can read all Yu-Gi-Oh cards. And yes, chat, today you will learn how to read. Let's start with a little bit of a test. How would you fix this card's text? So I'm going to give you Penguin Knight, a card whose text reads, when this card is sent directly from your deck to the graveyard by an effect of a card controlled by your opponent, unite your graveyard cards and your own deck, shuffle them, and form a new deck. So Penguin Knight obviously is a card that doesn't have PSCT. No Yu-Gi-Oh card nowadays reads like this at all, but the text on it is very strange. It's very unique, right? No need to change. It's perfect already. Well, let's assume that you want to give this card PSCT. In what way would you write this card? More often than not, if you asked someone, they would probably not be able to answer you perfectly, right? They'd be able to tell you generally what the card text would look like with PSCT, and we'll be revisiting this by the end of the lecture. And after we're done, you guys should be able to figure out the correct way to rewrite Penguin Knight with PSCT. So, this is the scary part. If you're a Yu-Gi-Oh player, this might terrify you, okay? Sit down in your seats. We are going to talk about how to read a card. This is important. How to read a Yu-Gi-Oh card. How to read a Yu-Gi-Oh card is actually genuinely important. And I'm not even talking about like the joke, the meme of like, haha, read your card, reading the card explains the card. It's true. Reading the card explains the card because the way Yu-Gi-Oh cards are written, they are written very intentionally with the goal of being able to be read in a way where you know exactly how everything on the card applies and resolves and activates all this stuff. When reading a Yu-Gi-Oh card, I have color-coded this for those of you that that don't know how to read. What you need to keep in mind is the colon and the semicolon. These two are very important when it comes to Yu-Gi-Oh card text. So everything that comes before the colon is condition to activate the card. Then, when you look at everything that happens before the semicolon, these are things that happen at the moment you activate the card. After the semicolon is things that happen when the card is resolving. I will clarify something right now. The True Tornado in chat said condition, cost, effect. That is wrong. That is incorrect. And we'll demystify that today. Because no, not everything that happens before the semicolon is a cost. Things like that are important to clarify and demystify because a lot of people have misunderstandings when it comes to the way card text is written. So here an example of a card that has it all is Bark of Dark Ruler. Let's read it together. If a fiend monster you control's battles during the damage step, colon. So that is the activation requirement of the card. The condition to activate is if a fiend monster you control battles, which is why it's before the colon. Then it says pay life points in multiples of 100, then target the opponent's battling monster. So here you do two things. You pay life points, which is the cost, and then you target the opponent's battling monster, which is not a cost. Today, chat, you will learn that targeting is never a cost. It is not a cost, okay? After this, I do not ever want to hear anyone say that a card targets for cost. I never want to hear that again. If there's anything you take away from this lecture, targeting is never a cost. We will clarify that when we get to the targeting section of today's lecture. And then after that, after the semicolon, that opponent's monster loses that much attack and defense until the end of this turn. That is the effect. Simple. So at this point, you have the condition to activate before the colon, then paying life points is the cost, and then you target, which is also something that you do at activation of the card. It's not a cost. And then after the semicolon, the effect of the card. Are we successfully reading cards? Because that's like step number one. You guys now know how to read a card. How does it feel to unlock the fifth dimension? That is the ability to read a card. Teach us more? Oh, I plan to. Trust me. If you think that's it, that's the end of the lecture. Goodbye. Thank you so much for coming. One thing to clarify, if a card has a colon or a semicolon like this, it indicates that the card is an activated effect, right? Continuous effects won't have these. But if a card is an activated effect, meaning that it starts a chain, it goes on the chain and stuff like that, it'll have a colon or a semicolon. All right. Activation condition must be true at the time of activation, but doesn't need to remain true in order to resolve. Meaning that when you look at a card such as Lightning Storm, for example, right? Lightning Storm does have an activation requirement, an activation condition, which says if you control no face-up cards. Now, keep in mind when it comes to something like this, if a card says, like Lightning Storm, if you control no face-up cards, that is what needs to be true in order to activate the card. However, now that you've activated the card, that activation condition no longer needs to remain true in order for the card to resolve. So if I activate Lightning Storm and then my opponent chains something and then I chain a quick play spell from my hand, for example, making it so I now control a second card that isn't just Lightning Storm will still resolve. Unless otherwise specified. There are cards that say something along the lines of like, this card must remain face up in order to activate and resolve and stuff like that. Or like, must be face up on the field in order to activate and resolve. I think an example of that is Madolche Messengelado or something that requires that you control a beast type Madolche or whatever at activation and resolution. Generally, when it comes to cards, the activation condition doesn't need to remain true in order for the card to resolve. It only has to be true at the moment when you're attempting to activate the card. Another thing that happens before the semicolon that isn't considered cost is choosing what effect you're activating. Look at Lightning Storm. It says if you control no cards, colon, activate one of these effects, semicolon. This is not cost, but it is before the semicolon. It's something that happens at activation. There's multiple things that will happen at activation, not even just targeting or paying costs. Then, cost versus targeting. We will demystify this right now, okay? I'm going to get to the bottom of this We're going to clear this up. You will be the good students. I never want to hear any of you say that targeting is cost ever again. Get ready. Okay? Costs include but are not limited to discarding a card, paying life points, revealing a card in your hand, etc. When a card such as that, before the semicolon says discard one card or pay life points or something like that, that is a cost. This is different to targeting. An action like targeting is not a cost, but it does happen at the same kind of time. It happens in the timing where you activate the card initially. This is where it's very different, right? Because this is when it's written before the semicolon, meaning that all these things happen at the moment where you activate the card. And then there's also choosing which effect to activate, which is also not a cost, like the example I gave you with Lightning Storm before. Everything before the semicolon is not considered to be effect text. An example of this would be Runic Destruction. Runic Destruction says, activate one of these effects, but skip your next battle phase after activation, semicolon. This is not a cost. This is choosing which effect you would like to activate. And then, target a spell trap card your opponent controls. Let's say you pick that effect, semicolon, once again, targeting, not a cost. Like if a card says that you don't have to pay the costs for your cards, you still have to target. You understand? Simple. Let us proceed. Conjunctions. This is the deep part of PSCT, and this is specifically the thing that happens every time you activate a card effect. This is how you understand how to resolve all of your different card effects, is with conjunction. So this is what happens after the semicolon, and no, the game did not bug. So, what are conjunctions? Conjunctions have the purpose of indicating timing and causation when it comes to effects, and serve to link two parts of an effect together. That's very wordy and doesn't actually explain anything, but I will explain better. So examples of conjunctions, there are 5 of them. Technically, there are 5. There's basically only 4. The 5th one is kind of goofy, but we'll get into it, all right? So different conjunctions you'll find when an effect has multiple parts are, and if you do, then, also after that, and. Specifically, the conjunctions are for effects that have multiple parts. So something like Compulsory Evacuation Device that just targets a guy and bounces it, doesn't have 2 parts, doesn't have any conjunctions. However, if you consider something along the lines of an effect that would say, let's say Soul Taker, for example, right? Which has to target an opponent's monster, destroy it, then that opponent gains 1,000 life points. That is an effect in 2 parts. It's an effect that has a part A and then a part B, and then specifically uses the conjunction then. And the question here is going to be, what does the conjunction then do that the other conjunctions don't, you know? So I'm going to be teaching you each of the individual conjunctions and what their purpose is, what their goal is, and how you apply their effects, and what the result of those effects being applied in that order or in that way do. So let's get into it. Do A, and if you do B. So in do A, and if you do B, every single one of these conjunctions has 2 things that you need to remember. So the things that you need to know are if the actions happen simultaneously or sequentially, meaning that they're considered to happen at the same time, or they're considered to happen one after the other. And then the other thing that you need to know about all of these conjunctions is whether or not the first part is required in order to apply the second part, or if the second part is required in order to apply the first part, and so on. So in do A, and if you do B, the actions are considered to be simultaneous, despite the fact that you physically do them one at a time, right? You do A, and then if you did A, then you do B. After the fact, those actions are considered to have happened simultaneously, which is very counterintuitive when it comes to and if you do. And if you do typically is the more confusing one for that exact reason, because it doesn't feel like something that should be simultaneous. It feels like it should be sequential. And A is required for B, but if B cannot be done, you still do A. So let's say, for example, a card says, let's say, target an opponent's monster, destroy it, and if you do, draw a card. So A here would be destroy it, and draw a card would be B. So in a situation like that, it's considered to be simultaneous. So you destroy the monster, and you draw a card simultaneously. However, A is required for B, meaning that if you do not destroy the card, you do not draw a card, right? You need to successfully do A in order to be allowed to do B. Let me use the laser pointer here, chat. I got you. You must successfully do A in order to then be able to do B. However, if B cannot be done, you still do A. So let's say, for example, right, you use that same card that that targets a guy your opponent controls, destroys it, then draws a card. If your opponent was to chain an effect to it, that would make it so you're no longer legally allowed to draw a card, right? Let's say they apply some kind of like Droll and Lockbird type effect in chain to this card. So you activate this card to pop and draw, and then they chain a thing that would make it so you're not allowed to draw. Then even though you can no longer do B, you'll still do A. So an example of this would be Thunder Crash. This is another example, which says destroy all monsters you control, and if you do, inflict 300 points of damage to your opponent for each monster destroyed. So Thunder Crash says Raigeki yourself now, and then burn your opponent for 3 for each of your guys that you destroyed. So let's say, for example, I activate Thunder Crash. Let's say I only control one monster, and my opponent removes that monster from the field. So I no longer have a monster when Thunder Crash would resolve. Thunder Crash will destroy nothing, and then because A didn't happen, I can't apply B, even though it burns 300 for each monster destroyed, and logically, if I destroy none, then I'd be inflicting 0. But in this case, I wouldn't be inflicting 0. I would simply not apply B at all. However, if my opponent were to chain Hanawata, for example, a card that says that my opponent cannot take any effect damage, then my Thunder Crash will still destroy all cards on my board and attempt to inflict damage to my opponent, and then they'll simply take 0 instead because of Hanawata. This is the thing that you need to keep in mind, right? Remember that it's simultaneous. I know it doesn't make sense that it's simultaneous because and if you do in English implies that you do the first thing, and then if you successfully do the first thing, you will after that do the second thing. That is not how it works in Yu-Gi-Oh! For some reason. I can't explain it. I can't tell you why they decided to just like ignore how the English language works, but that is how an and if you do effect functions. So you do A, and if you do B, but after the fact it is considered to be simultaneous. So technically, you apply it one at a time, but then after the fact, the game will look back and go, okay, all of this happened simultaneously, which is important when we talk about missing timing, and we'll get to that shortly. Next up, we have do A, then do B. Conjunction number 2. Do A, then do B is sequential. So do A, then do B is kind of like and if you do in the sense that A is required for B, but if B cannot happen, you still do A. Same thing as and if you do, except that then is the counterpart to and if you do, where the actions are considered sequential. So you do A, then do B, and then after the fact, the last thing to have occurred is B, not A. Simple. So in the example of do A, and if you do B, whenever you would look back at what is the last action to have occurred, if you resolve Thunder Crash, the last action to have occurred would be all monsters I control were destroyed and I inflicted 300 damage to my opponent. Both of them things. However, in this example here, with do A, then do B, the last action to have occurred would only be B. An example of this is Soul Taker, like I was saying before. Target a face-up monster your opponent controls, semicolon, destroy that target, then your opponent gains 1,000 life points, which is important here because this is the kind of card that can make stuff miss timing. So this is why we're going over all of this before we get to the mistiming portion of today's lecture, because specifically this needs to be understood in order to understand why cards miss timing. What's the difference between and if you do and then? The difference between and if you do and then is specifically this. So, and if you do, the effects are considered simultaneous, and then the effects are considered sequential. That is realistically the only difference between the and if you do and the then conjunction. Next up, we have also. The also conjunction is a unique one. The also conjunction says that it is simultaneous. A is not required for B, and vice versa. When a card's effect says also, specifically what that means is that the A portion and the B portion happen simultaneously, same as and if you do. However, when you have an effect that says also, A is not required for B and vice versa, meaning that contrary to and if you do, if a card says do A, also do B, if when the effect would resolve you can no longer do A, you still do B. An example of this is Arch Nemesis Protoss. Protoss specifically says to declare a monster attribute, destroy all monsters on the field with that attribute. Also, until the end of the next turn, neither player can special summon monsters with that attribute. If Protos said, destroy all monsters with that attribute, and if you do, neither player can summon monsters with that type, with that attribute for the rest of the turn, until the end of the next turn, then what that would mean is that if Protos called Dark and didn't destroy anything, because it itself can't be destroyed by card effects, with an and if you do text, it wouldn't apply the second part, the lock. The only reason why Protos does apply the lock, despite the fact that it didn't destroy anything, is because the text says also and not and if you do or then or something like that. Now keep in mind, again, they're simultaneous. So these actions are considered to happen at the same time. However, that is different when we talk about do A, also after that, do B. So also after that, do B is the counterpart to also that is sequential instead of being simultaneous. So similarly to also, A is not required for B and vice versa. Meaning that these two things will happen in sequence, one after the other, as opposed to also where they happen at the same time, which is important for missing timing, which we'll talk about in a moment. An example of this would be Goblinberg. Goblinberg says, when this card is normal summoned, you can special summon a level 4 or lower monster from your hand. Also, after that, change this card to defense position. Let's say, for example, I activated Goblinberg, and my opponent, I don't know, chained Vanity's Emptiness to make it so that I can't special summon. Because A is not required for B and vice versa, Goblinberg would still apply its effect. It wouldn't successfully special summon, but it would change itself to defense. Another example that we could use for this, for B not required for A in this example, is let's say I activate Goblinberg, and then my opponent would use some kind of card that would make it so Goblinberg cannot change its battle position. Then in this situation, you would not apply B because you can't change the battle position of Goblinberg, but you would still apply A. So that's also after that. And then there's one more conjunction that we need to talk about. And I'll say it right now. This is the part that you can like kind of ignore. There's another conjunction and it's and. Do A and do B. And when looking for cards that read do A and do B, there's like two that say this. The thing that's really funny, you'll have cards that say the word and, but it's not the PSCT word and. It's just the English word and. So it's really hard to like find a real effect that says do A and do B. But an example of this, first off, do A and do B is simultaneous. And the reason why do A and do B is so different to the rest of the conjunctions is specifically because in do A and do B, you need to be able to do both A and B in order to resolve the effect. If by the time the effect would resolve, you cannot do both A and B, then the effect will not resolve. It won't be applied. The example of this is number 53, Heart Earth. This is one of the like two cards that I found that have this text. Heart Earth says, when this card on the field is destroyed by a card effect while it has no Xyz material, you can special summon one number 52 Heart Earth Dragon from your extra deck and attach this card from the graveyard to it as an Xyz material. Number 92, number 92. Yeah, I can't see the number. It's too small. So Heart Earth says if it dies while it has no materials, if it's destroyed by card effect, summon Heart Earth Dragon from the extra deck and attach itself as material. So let's say here, for example, I activate the Heart Earth Dragon in my grave and my opponent chains a DD Crow to banish my Heart Earth from the grave. Because it's an and effect, because it's not able to apply B, the effect to attach itself, because it's no longer in the grave, then Heart Earth will not summon Heart Earth Dragon from the extra deck. As opposed to if Heart Earth said something along the lines of, and if you do, which we learned that if you can no longer do B, you still do A, or if it was a then, which if you can't do B, you still do A, and also works that way. With also and also after that, if you can't do B, you still do A. This is the only conjunction where if you cannot do a later part of the effect, you don't do any of them. Heart Earth being one of the very few cards that does this. Ladies and gentlemen in the chat, those are the conjunctions. We have explained all 5 of the conjunctions. Easy clap. So effects with multiple conjunctions. So this is when you have an effect that says do A, and if you do B, also do C, for example, right? That's when effects get a little bit more complicated. So if you have a card exactly like I listed, do A, and if you do B, also do C. This is important specifically because when do you stop? Like, let's say you can't do A. Do you stop there? You don't do B, you don't do C? What if you can't do C? Do you still do A and B? We'll clarify it. With the conjunctions, you're able to know this based upon the conjunction specifically. So let's take Incantation Chalice Slime for example, which says, discard one card, and if you do, first conjunction, special summon an incantation monster from your deck. Also, during the end phase, lose 2,500 life points if you did not special summon a ritual monster this turn after you resolve this effect. So let's say, for example, I activate Chalice Slime, and my opponent chains Vanity's Emptiness, which says that neither player can special summon monsters, and Chalice Slime is attempting to special summon an incantation from my deck. How would this resolve? Does anyone know? Anyone in chat at all? So in this situation, with Vanity's Emptiness applying in chain to Chalice Slime, you will do A, because nothing is stopping you from doing A. So you'll do A, and then at that point, and if you do B, but you can no longer do B, because Vanity's Emptiness is preventing you from doing B. But as we know with the also conjunction, what happens before the conjunction of also is not required in order to apply what happens after. So in this situation, you would still do A, discard a card from your hand. You would not do B because B is no longer legal, so you don't summon an incantation from your deck. But then at that point, also will still apply the second part of its effect, do C, so you will still take 2,500 damage at the end of the turn if you didn't ritual summon this turn. So that's how those conjunctions will work. It's losing life points, not taking damage. I mean, same thing. Okay, N-Man. Okay, buddy. Same shit. Not the same thing, I know, but same thing. Kinda. So, does this make sense? Do we understand the conjunctions? Is mayonnaise also a conjunction? Okay, that's my cue to know that we are good to go and we can move on to the next slide. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to demystify something here real quick, okay? Something to demystify. A lot of times you will see judges say the following. Conjunctions say nothing about activation legality. They only explain how to resolve effects. They'll say something along the lines of, conjunctions don't tell you whether or not you can activate an effect. They don't tell you, like, if an effect activation is legal or anything like that. Conjunctions only tell you how to resolve. And the thing that annoyed me is so many people say this without ever explaining what the heck that means. Chat, if I ask you right now, what does this mean? Would you be able to answer me? Because I can tell you right now, for the longest time, I'm like, yeah, I know that that's true. Can I explain what the fuck that means? No, I can't. I don't fucking know what that means. It's words. Yeah, exactly. It's just word soup. Now, the explanation for this is that when it comes to card activation legality, cards need to be able to apply all of their effects in order to be activated legally. You can't activate a card that would do nothing, or a card that one of the effects you're activating cannot be resolved or isn't illegal, like can't legally be applied. So for example, you're not allowed to use Pot of Desires under Droll, and you know the reason why is because it would do nothing. You can't draw cards. Even though you would still pay cost banish 10, you can't draw cards, you can't legally activate the card. So here's an example. Dark Ruler No More. Ladies and gentlemen of the chat, can I activate Dark Ruler No More if all monsters my opponent controls are negated? Because Dark Ruler No More says negate the effects of all face of monster your opponent controls until the end of the turn. Also, for the rest of this turn after this card resolves, your opponent takes no damage. And as we know, the also conjunction says that you don't need to successfully do A in order to apply B. So is Dark Ruler No More a legal activation? And the answer is no. And this is a really good example of clarifying why the conjunction doesn't give you any indication about activation legality. And the reason why that's important is specifically because, logically, because of the also conjunction, you don't need to successfully apply A to apply B, but in this case, you're not allowed to activate Dark Ruler No More because they have their entire board negated. So in this situation, you can't activate Dark Ruler No More because A would do nothing. However, like on the contrary, if I activate Dark Ruler No More on my opponent's board that doesn't have only negated monsters, and then they somehow chain some effect that negates all their monsters, then Dark Ruler No More wouldn't be the card that's negating all my monsters. However, because even though A didn't happen, you would also apply B. meaning that the opponent would still deal no damage in that situation. Another example of this is Dragon Maid Xiao. So Dragon Maid Xiao says, if your opponent activates a card or effect, you can quick effect, negate the activation, and if you do, destroy that card. Also, after that, return this card to the extra deck, and if you do, special summon a House Dragon Maid. Can I activate this effect of Dragon Maid Xiao if I do not have House Dragon Maid in my extra deck? This card has 3 conjunctions, by the way. Negate the activation, and if you do, destroy it. Also, after that, return this card to the extra deck, and if you do, special summon House Dragon Maid. And the answer is that you cannot. You cannot activate the effect of Dragon Maid Xiao if you do not have a House Dragon Maid in your extra deck. So even though logically you would say, well, there's an also, right? There's an also in there, and also after that. And with also after that, you don't need to successfully do the thing that comes after it to do the thing that comes before it. Why can't you activate this? And the reason why is because you need to be able to resolve, like successfully resolve all parts of the effect. And because there is a part of the effect that cannot be legally, like successfully resolved, you can't legally activate the card. They can't legally activate the effect of Xiao. So when looking at activation legality for cards, you specifically need to look at, can I do all the things that my effect is telling me that I need to do? This is different than if like it has an optional portion to it, right? Let's say a card says, destroy a monster your opponent controls, and if you do, you can draw 1 card. Under Joel and Lockbird, that's completely legal because the drawing is optional, so you can choose not to do it. As opposed to if every part of the effect is something that you need to apply, that is a mandatory part of the effect, then at that point, you would need to be able to use to resolve all of those parts of that effect in order to be allowed to activate the card or the effect. All right. Targeting keywords. So this is the last thing that you need to know PSCT wise before we get into missing timing, which I know is what you guys are all waiting for. So with PSCT, the big parts of PSCT are, like I explained before, activation condition, things that happen at activation, things that happen when the card resolves. We talked about the things that happen at activation, costs, targeting, things like that. And then we talked about the different conjunctions that you use when applying effects. Here we're going to be talking about the different keywords in targeting that let you know how a card resolves based upon what it targeted. This is cost keywords. I'm going to lose my... Okay, moving on. Targeting keywords. This is PSCT, I promise. Promise it's PSCT. So for targeting keywords, how cards interact with things that they target. Now, we're specifically talking about unique wording when it comes to targeting. So something like Icarus Attack, right? Says tribute a winged beast monster, target 2 cards on the field, destroy them. You look at something like Offering to the Snake Deity, says target a face-up reptile monster you control and 2 cards your opponent controls, destroy all 3 targets. Look at something like Escape of the Unchained. Target an unchained monster you control and 1 card on the field. Destroy both. Something like Raigeki Break says discard a card, target a card on the field, destroy it. So in these 4 different cards, we have different text. One says destroy it. One says destroy them. One says destroy all 3 targets. And one says destroy both. And this text is very unique in letting you know how the card resolves based upon whether or not any if all or all if not targets remain on the field or remain like where they were, right? So we'll talk about it. The first one we'll talk about is cards that target a card and apply an effect to it, to them, to that card, or to those cards. Okay? So these 4 will work the same way. Targeting requirement does not need to remain true and applies to any and all targets that remain. So this is Icarus Attack and this is Raigeki Break. When I say targeting requirement does not need to remain true, when a card says destroy it, let's say for example you had a card that says target a dark monster your opponent controls. If by the time the effect resolves, it's no longer a dark monster, if the card says destroy it, destroy them, destroy that card, or destroy those cards, even if it is no longer a dark monster, the targeting requirement does not need to remain true for those keywords, right? And it applies to any and all targets that remain. So for example, with Icarus Attack, because it targets 2 cards on the field and says destroy them, As long as one of those two targets remains, it will still destroy whatever remains. Yes, this is Promethean Princess. Same thing. So let's say Promethean Princess, for example, right? Promethean Princess says, target a fire monster you control and a monster your opponent controls, destroy them. In that situation, let's say your fire monster leaves the field, Promethean Princess will still summon itself, and it will still destroy the opponent's card. Same thing as if you protected your fire monster, like let's say you use a Balinx to protect your Sunlight Wolf, which you targeted with Promethean Princess. The Promethean Princess will still summon itself, and it'll still destroy the opponent's card, but it won't destroy yours. Then you have cards that target a card and apply an effect to both or all of them, or something like that, right? Then the targeting requirement does not need to remain true. However, it applies only if all the targets are still present. Simple. So SP Little Knight, for example, this is the most relevant example that you can even think of. SP Little Knight targets a monster you control and another monster on the field, and it banishes both until the end phase. And because it says banish both until the end phase, then in this situation, if one of those two targets is no longer present when SP would resolve its effect, then it won't banish either one of them. Which is interesting, because if SP Little Knight would said banish them until the end phase, then if one of those two targets left the field, then it would still banish the other one until the end phase. SP versus unaffected, only SP is banished, correct. So SP just needs to apply its effect to both cards. So even if whatever it is that you're targeting with the SP, if one of those two cards is unaffected, then SP still applies its effect to both. Next up, we have cards that target a card and apply an effect to that target or those targets. When a card says that it applies the effect to that target or those targets, the targeting requirement needs to remain true in order for the effect to apply. And it applies to any and all targets that remain. The best example of this is Atlantean Marksman. This is probably the most well-known example of this. Atlantean Marksman says, if this card is sent to the grave to activate a water monster's effect, target one set card your opponent controls, destroy that target. That target being a set card your opponent controls. If the set card that your opponent controls is let's say a continuous trap, let's say it's skill drain, right? So I send my Marksman to the grave to activate a water monster's effect. I activate Marksman, target my opponent's face down, skill drain. My opponent chains their skill drain. If Atlantean Marksman said, target a set card your opponent controls, destroy it, then in that case, the skill drain would be destroyed. But because it says destroy that target, then that target must still remain the thing that Marksman is allowed to target, which in this case is a set card your opponent controls. So in this situation, because when Marksman resolves, the skill drain is no longer a set card the opponent controls, then the Marksman will not destroy the face down. Well, won't destroy the skill drain because it's no longer face down. And then I believe there's one last. Cards that target a card and apply an effect to all targets. An example of that would be Pot of Avarice and Offering to the Snake Deity. The targeting requirement needs to remain true to apply, and it'll apply only if all targets are still present. Now, it's fairly obvious when you look at Avarice or Offering to the Snake Deity, specifically because Pot of Avarice says target 5 monsters in your grave, shuffle all 5 into the deck, then draw 2 cards. If one of them gets Deity Crowed, then you can't shuffle all 5, you don't shuffle any of them. You stop applying the effect there. Same thing to Offering to the Snake Deity. It says, target a face-up reptile monster you control and 2 cards your opponent controls, destroy all 3 targets. If one of those 3 targets leaves the field, then Offering to the Snake Deity won't apply because all 3 targets are not on the field in order to be destroyed. And the effect specifically destroys all the targets. But the other thing that's important here is that the targeting requirement needs to remain true. For Offering to the Snake Deity, if the monster you control by some means stops being a reptile monster before Offering to the Snake Deity resolves, then it will not destroy anything. So if you go, let's say I control a reptile monster, I Offering to the Snake Deity, my reptile monster and 2 monsters and 2 back row my opponent controls, and my opponent chains DNA Surgery Call Machine, then my reptile is no longer a reptile. Offering to the Snake Deity will resolve without effect and will not destroy anything. So those are the targeting keywords. Okay. Do we have the correct text to fix Penguin Knight? Now that we've explained everything there is to explain about PSCT, how would you guys Fix the text on Penguin Knight. That fluffball is perfect the way they are, and I would change nothing. Let's fix it. Let's correct the text. The way you would correct the text on this, ladies and gentlemen, is you would change it to, if this card is sent from your deck to the graveyard by an opponent's card effect, shuffle all cards in your graveyard into the deck. It would be that simple. This is what the corrected text of Penguin Knight would be if they chose to give this card PSCT in this day and age. When they reprinted it, when they did the reprints of like LOB and Dark Beginning packs and all that stuff, they just chose to not update the text on any of the cards. If they had chosen to update the text on the card, more than likely, this is what the card's text would have been. If this card is sent from the deck to the grave by an opponent's card effect, mandatory effect, because it doesn't say you can, which indicates that it's a mandatory effect, shuffle all cards in your graveyard into the deck. Simple. Did it go to an if because it's mandatory instead of a when? Yeah, basically. Why would you change the when for an if? Because putting less text on the card is better. If a card's a mandatory effect, there's no reason for it to say when. Just say if. And now you might be asking yourselves, but why? What's the difference between when and if? I know what you guys are here for. Chapter 4, missing timing. But where did it go? Where is it? Where is the timing? Why are they missing? Why game bug? Let's talk about it, okay? Dude, I'm gonna be so real with you. I struggled so hard yesterday. Put into words, missing timing. So I'm gonna be doing a lot of yapping and explaining to clarify this, because missing timing is actually a concept that is very simple. It is such a simple concept, but for some reason, putting into words how it functions and why it functions the way that it does is so difficult, and I don't know why. So let's get into it. Have you ever seen this message pop up on Master Duel? Miss the activation timing. You cannot activate the effect of, in this example, Dupe Frog. A lot of people have had this message pop up and go, what does this mean? What does this mean? Why is this message popping up on my screen? Because I'll be real, this message pops up, but it doesn't have any explanation. It just says, oops, you missed the activation timing. You can't use that, lol. And a bunch of people will go, but why? Why does this say this? Why is this message popping up? What is missing timing? Missing timing is when optional when effects cannot activate due to their activation timing being missed. Now, the heck does that mean, right? This is the best explanation I can give you for what missing timing. So what you need to know, missing timing applies only to optional effects that say when. Optional when effects. Examples of this are Dupe Frog, Suwani, Fire of the Yangzing, and White Aura Whale. Dupe Frog says, when this card is sent from the field to the graveyard, you can add one frog monster from deck to hand. That's how you know the effect is optional. You can. If Dupe Frog says, when this card is sent to the graveyard, add a frog from deck to hand, that's a mandatory effect. But you know it's optional because it says you can. Same thing for Suwani. Suwani says, when this card you control is destroyed by a battle or card effect and sent to your graveyard, you can special summon a Yangzing monster from your deck. White Aura Whale says, when this card is synchro summoned, you can destroy all attack position monsters your opponent controls. When you can is the thing you're looking for to know if a card can miss timing. So how does a card miss timing? For an optional when effect to activate, it must still be when that effect's trigger was met. What this means by this is that if a card says if, for example, right? It says, if something happens, do this. Like if X happens, do Y. Then it doesn't care whether or not X, the thing that has happened, is still in that moment in order to do Y. However, with when effects, the reason why they miss timing is because they're specifically only allowed to activate at the moment in which the when has been met. Examples of this are the following, and these are dueling book replays that we'll look at in a second, but I really, really want to hammer this point home. For a when effect to trigger, the last action to have occurred has to have been the thing that triggers your card. Kind of. What this means is, like, let's say, for example, Dupe Frog, right? Let's go back. Let's look at Dupe Frog. Dupe Frog says, When this card is sent from the field to the graveyard, you can add a frog. This means that in order for Dupe Frog to trigger on a subsequent chain, the last thing to have occurred before the chain in which Dupe Frog is activating is Dupe Frog being sent to the graveyard. Same thing with Suwani. For Suwani to be able to activate, the last thing to have happened in the chain before the chain in which Suwani would activate has to have been Suwani being destroyed by battle or card effect. Same thing with White Aura Whale. The last thing to occur before White Aura Whale would activate in its chain has to have been that the White Aura Whale is synchro summoned. Does that mean Dupe has to be chain link 1? No. That just means that the chain in which Dupe Frog activates has to be immediately after Dupe Frog being sent to the grave. It doesn't have to be chain link 1, but it has to be activating in the next possible chain that happens immediately after Dupe Frog is sent to the grave. Examples here. These are 4 examples of Dupe Frog missing timing. We have 2 examples of Dupe Frog missing timing because of sequential effects, basically because of the conjunctions we talked about earlier, then and also after that. Those are 2 sequential effects. And then we also have Dupe Frog missing timing because of the chain links and missing timing because it was used as a summoning material. Dupe Frog missing timing because of sequential effects. Let's have a look. So here for this example, you would have Dupe Frog on your field and Mass Change 2 in your hand. So Dupe Frog, as we clarified, says when this card is sent from the field to the graveyard, when sent from field to the graveyard, you can add a frog monster from deck to hand. When you can. Mass Change 2 says, discard a card, then target a face-up monster you control that has a level. Send it to the grave. Also, after that, if it left the field by this effect, summon from your extra deck a masked hero monster with the same attribute. So in this example, we activate Mass Change 2, discard Swap Frog, target our Dupe Frog. And in this case, we will resolve Mass Change 2, send Dupe Frog. Also, after that, we summon Masked Hero Acid. In this situation, the Dupe Frog in our graveyard is not allowed to activate, and specifically the reason why is because the last action to have occurred in the chain before Dupe Frog would activate was not Dupe Frog being sent to the grave. Because the also after that conjunction is sequential, meaning the things happen one after the other. Meaning that this sends Dupe to the grave. Also after that, new action, summon a masked hero monster. I know a lot of you guys are probably looking at this like, what did he say? What the fuck is this? What is he saying? Now to clarify, if Mass Change 2 said also instead of also after that, then with the also conjunction, those 2 effects would be simultaneous, meaning that this chain after the Mass Change 2 resolves, the last action to occur would be Dupe Frog is sent to the grave and Acid is summoned. Therefore, Dupe Frog would be allowed to activate. Cool? Dope? Pog? Nice. Next example. But this time it's Dupe Frog missing timing because of chain links. In this situation, we're going to be putting some cards back. We have to set up the replay. Sorry about that. So we got Torrential Tribute. I'm sure you guys are big fans of Torrential Tribute. Let's say I control a Dupe Frog face down and a Torrential Tribute set. So here, I pass turn to my opponent, and my opponent is going to normal summon Satellar Knight Deneb, which on summon has the effect to search for a card. So Deneb goes Chainlink 1, effect to search for a Tellar Knight monster and add it from deck to hand. And I go Chainlink 2, activate Torrential Tribute. In this situation, the chain will resolve backwards. Torrential Tribute will destroy both our monsters, and then the Deneb is going to add Altair from deck to hand. In a new chain here, after the Torrential Tribute goes to the grave, my Dupe Frog is not allowed to activate, and the reason why, and this one is like the more simple one, I think this is the one that people really know about, like missing timing. The reason why my Dupe Frog can't activate here is because the last action to have occurred isn't the Dupe Frog being destroyed, it's the Satellar Knight Deneb resolving to add Altair to hand. So like, as I said, you just need to know whether or not the next chain, the chain in which Dupe Frog would activate, that chain needs to be started directly after the Dupe Frog being destroyed. And because the Dupe Frog being destroyed was Chainlink 2, and then the search was chain link 1. The dupe frog misses timing. Yeah, the last thing to happen was a search and not the dupe frog being sent to the grave. What if the opponent doesn't search? Let's take this a step further, right? Same chain, Deneb chain link 1, chain link 2 is the Torrential, chain link 3 I Veiler the Deneb. So Veiler would negate their Deneb, chain link 2 Torrential would wipe the board, and then chain link 1, the Deneb is negated so it doesn't search. The dupe frog would still miss timing in that instance, and the reason why is because the last action to have occurred is the chain link 1 effect resolving negated. Because you Veilering their Deneb doesn't remove their Deneb from the chain. I'll explain one thing here that's insane. Actually, let's explain one thing here. A card that matters here would be the Yangzing Counter Trap. 9 Pillars of the Yangzing. So a lot of people will ask me, well, why does 9 Pillars of the Yangzing not make your Yangzing monster miss timing, right? Because 9 Pillars says when a spell trap card or monster effect is activated and you control a Yangzing card, negate the activation if you do shuffle that card into the deck, then destroy one other Yangzing card you control. But the difference here is that if you negate the activation of a card, you effectively remove that card from the chain. So if you were to like let's say the chain was chain link 1 something, chain link 2 something else, chain link 3, the opponent activates an effect, chain link 4, you 9 Pillars, then you 9 Pillars negate shuffle their card, destroy your Yangzing monster will miss timing. Versus if they go chain link 1 something and you go chain link 2 9 Pillars, then in that case you'll resolve 9 Pillars, you'll negate the activation, shuffle their thing, then destroy your Yangzing, and then their chain link 1 effect, because the activation was negated, it's removed from the chain entirely. Therefore, the last action to have occurred is your Yangzing monster being destroyed by 9 Pillars. Because their effect was removed from the chain because specifically the activation was negated. I know that's confusing, but that's how that works. That's how that interaction functions. If it was negated, was it ever real? If the activation was negated, specifically. Next up, we have because of a summon material. This one's also fairly simple, but a lot of people get this one wrong, so we'll talk about it. Let's say, for example, I normal summon my dupe frog, and I perform a link summon. I send the dupe frog in order to summon the Almirage. Can you tell me what's wrong with this one? Fairly simple. The last action to occur is not the dupe frog being sent to the graveyard, it's the Salamangreat Almirage being link summoned. Whenever you're using a monster on the field as a material for a summon, sending the materials to the grave happens before you perform the link summon. They happen sequentially. So because those actions happen sequentially, the last action is the Almirage being summoned. So because the Almirage is being summoned, then in this situation, the dupe frog does not get to activate because the last action to occur was not the dupe frog being sent to the grave. And then we have another sequential effect that makes dupe frog miss timing, and we'll talk about it as well. This uses the other sequential PSCT conjunction. So the last one we used was also after that. Now in this situation, we'll use a then effect. So if I normal summon my dupe frog and I pass, and then my opponent here activates Soul Taker, targeting my dupe frog. Soul Taker says, target a face-up monster your opponent controls, destroy that target, then your opponent gains 1,000 life points. Very simple, Professor Coder. Very simple, K-Cray. So in this situation, Soul Taker targets the dupe frog and then says, destroy that target, then your opponent gains 1,000 life points. So the thing that you got to keep in mind here, because it's sequential, it'll make it miss timing. The last action to occur is the 1,000 life points being gained. So here the dupe frog gets destroyed, then I gain 1,000 life points. In this situation, the dupe frog misses timing because the last action to occur, the last action before the chain in which dupe frog would activate, is 1,000 life points being gained and not the dupe frog being sent to the graveyard. Does this all make sense? I've given you 4 different examples in which dupe frog is able to miss timing. Now let's give you an example where dupe frog does not miss timing when it feels like it should. In this example, I have dupe frog and Metal Foe's Stealin. So I control dupe frog and I scale Stealin. So Stealin has the effect in the scale that says once per turn you can target one other face-up card you control, destroy it, and if you do, this is the important conjunction here, is and if you do, set a Metal Foe spell trap directly from your deck. Now, chat, do you guys remember, and if you do, is it sequential or is it simultaneous? Pop quiz. Sun Saparilla, you were not paying attention. It is simultaneous. The actions are considered to happen at the same time. So in this situation, if Stealin activates its effect targeting the dupe frog, sends the dupe frog, well, destroys it, sending it to the graveyard to set Metal Foe's counter. In this situation, because it is an and if you do effect, meaning that the two actions are considered to be simultaneous, then in the next chain, the chain in which Dupe Frog would activate, that chain is responding to both the card being set and the Dupe Frog being destroyed and sent to the grave. So Dupe Frog will not miss timing and is allowed to activate in the grave here to add a Swamp Frog from deck to hand. So in the situation where the Chain Link 1 effect of the previous chain simultaneously destroys the Dupe Frog and sets the Metalphos counter due to the "and if you do" conjunction here, which we know is a simultaneous conjunction, this would make it so that the Dupe Frog does not miss timing. Next up, further clarification. We got some more examples here for you. When effects do not need to be Chain Link 1. So the example with Dupe Frog only has to activate in a chain in which the last action of the previous chain includes the Dupe Frog being sent to the graveyard. But it doesn't need to be Chain Link 1, and I'll explain that in a moment. Same thing with Torrential Tribute. A lot of people ask about Torrential Tribute. Let me move out of the way so you guys can read. Torrential Tribute doesn't miss timing, but it does need to activate in a chain that starts immediately after a summon occurs. Saying that Torrential Tribute misses timing is technically incorrect because cards that miss timing are only optional trigger effects, and Torrential Tribute is not a trigger effect. And the reason why I say this is because, let's say you miss the activation timing for your Torrential Tribute on Mass Duel, you won't get that pop-up message that says, "Oops, Torrential Tribute missed timing, you can't activate it," or whatever. You just won't have the option to activate it because that's not a missing timing situation. So let's give you an example of a when effect that doesn't need to be Chain Link 1. Let's have a look. Let's say, for example, I control some Unchained monsters. Shoutouts to Unchained. So I have a set Torrential Tribute. I have a Rakea on board and a Ruha on board, and I normal summon Dupe Frog. On the normal summon of my Dupe Frog, I activate my Torrential Tribute, destroying my Aruha, my Rakea, and my Dupe Frog. Torrential is Chain Link 1, specifying. In the next chain, we have two effects that says if this card is destroyed by battle or card effect, and Dupe Frog says when this card is sent from the field to the grave. So what you got to keep in mind, for Dupe Frog to be allowed to activate, the previous chain, the last action to have occurred in the previous chain, has to have been the Dupe Frog being it has to include the Dupe Frog being sent to the grave. So in this situation, Dupe Frog doesn't miss timing here. And because Rakea and Aruha are if effects, they can never miss timing. So in this situation, I am legally allowed to activate my Aruha as Chain Link 1, my Dupe Frog as Chain Link 2, and my Rakea as Chain Link 3. Because all you need to know when it comes to when trigger effects is they're allowed to be activated at any point in the next chain after their trigger was met, so long as the last action to have occurred in the previous chain is an action that meets the card's trigger. So in this situation, the Dupe Frog is allowed to activate as Chain Link 2, as Chain Link 3, so long as it's being activated in a chain that started in response to the last action being something that sent the Dupe Frog to the grave. It could have been Chain Link 19 if there was 19 trigger effects being activated on this chain. And now the other example, the Torrential Tribute example that you guys all want, because everyone talks about Torrential Tribute misses timing. I'll explain to you in what way Torrential Tribute misses timing. Okay, let's talk about it. So all you need to know about Torrential Tribute is that Torrential Tribute specifically, like Dupe Frog, needs to be activated in a chain that was started immediately after a summon occurred. So in this situation, let's give you a scenario. My opponent has 5 set back row, and I have a set Torrential Tribute. I normal summon Armageddonite and trigger Armageddonite as Chain Link 1. Clarification, this entire chain is started as a result of Armageddonite being normal summoned. Keep that in mind. Armageddonite Chain Link 1, opponent goes Lance Chain Link 2, target Armageddonite. I go Chalice Chain Link 3, target Armageddonite. They go Book Chain Link 4, target Armageddonite. I go Shrink Chain Link 5, target Armageddonite. They go Double Cyclone Chain Link 6, targeting 2 back row. I am legally allowed in this situation to go Chain Link 7, Torrential Tribute. This is legal. This is a completely legal scenario. And the reason why this scenario is legal, and the reason why the Torrential Tribute doesn't, in this case, miss timing, as a lot of people like to say, is because all Torrential Tribute needs in order to be activated is it needs to be activated in a chain that was started directly after a summon occurred. Because this entire chain is responding to a summon, in this situation, you're allowed to activate Torrential Tribute at any point in this chain. Even if he activated all these other effects like chain link 9, 10, 11, 12, as long as the chain was started by a summon occurring, you can torrential tribute chain link 19. The chain link 1 has to be the summon. Well, no, not chain link 1 has to be the summon. It would have to be chain link 1 of a previous chain, yes. If I have a set torrential tribute, for example, I activate imperm targeting my opponent's IP Masquerena, and they go chain link 2 IP. They go resolve the IP to summon a monster. Chain link 1, my imperm resolves without effect because it lost its target. In that new chain, I can't activate torrential tribute because this chain is not responding to a summon occurring. It's responding to my infinite impermanence resolving. Does this all make sense? Do you guys understand missing the timing? Honestly, no. I don't know how to explain this better. I'm gonna be real. Like I want everyone to be able to understand it. I just gotta figure out how to. Let me try one more way to like explain this that potentially can explain it better. You need to visualize that every single time a chain begins, especially when it comes to trigger effects, right? Trigger effects always have to activate in response to something because something happened to meet the card's trigger. So every time a chain is started in Yu-Gi-Oh, that chain will always look to what is the last thing that happened on the previous action before that chain was started in order to see what started the chain in the first place. So when you normal summon Armageddon Knight, the reason why Armageddon Knight is able to trigger is because the game state looks back to what the last thing that happened was, and what the last thing that happened was the Armageddon Knight being summoned. Then that's why Armageddon Knight triggers. So the game state in that situation would look back to what the last action to have occurred was. When you have an if effect, the if effect doesn't care that last action to have occurred before the chain in which it would activate was the thing that triggers your card. An if effect just cares whether or not the thing that triggers it happened at all. Versus a when effect specifically cares about whether or not that last thing that happened before the current chain occurs was the thing that meets your card's trigger. Does that make sense? Anytime a chain is started, there's always a reason why it started, a catalyst that started that chain. The last thing that happened before is the thing that starts that chain. The when optional effect specifically cares about whether or not that last action was the thing that triggered your card. Does that make sense? Did I cook? What is this emote? Detention. Mods, enable this immediately. Detention. I love it. It's so good. But yeah, subscribe now. All of you, you must all subscribe. If you're watching on YouTube, subscribe for more lectures. I do these every single week on Fridays, right over here at twitch.tv/distantcoder on stream. We go over the lectures. You guys get to ask all sorts of questions. The lectures are a lot longer live because they're a lot more intricate and in-depth, and we get sidetracked and talk about a lot of other things. So if you guys like having like a full-on classroom that explains to you all these things and everything, subscribe and come check out the stream. I would appreciate it. If you guys are on YouTube, come check out the stream. It would mean a lot to me if you did. I think that's the school bell. Class dismissed, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out. I appreciate it. You guys are awesome. You guys are great. You guys have been a fantastic classroom to have here today. You guys go enjoy recess. Go play Yu-Gi-Oh on the playground with your friends. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one.